Hey, what's up?
Not much.
I can hear you. What's up? How are you?
Doing good. How are you?
Doing pretty good.
Cool. So initially, I was just going to come on because I had heard. Well, I wanted to say two things. First one was you said that Jesus went to see Hades and Sheol. I'm kind of even confused on what's what there, but you said that Jesus went to Hades when in Acts 2 you listed that as your reference. Acts 2, what was it, like 13 or something like that?
No, I said Acts 2:34 showed that David is not in heaven right now.
Oh, okay. Okay, yeah. Okay. I thought you also said that uh Jesus went to Hades. Did you
Well,
not? You didn't say that.
well, I did because I believe I didn't reference for that one, but it says in the Luke chapter, or not Luke, Acts chapter 2, it says in the verse, let's see, 27,
31.
27, it references a prophecy made by David, and it says, "Thou wilt not leave my soul in Hades, neither wilt thou allow thine Holy One to see corruption." But then verse 29, it says, David is buried, his sepulchre is with us to this day. And then he says about verse 30, he said that prophecy, verse 31, he said that prophecy was about Christ. It says, he sing this before spake of the resurrection of Christ, that Christ's soul was not left in Hades. So if it's not left there, then that tells me that the soul of Christ went there, but then left.
So then now what we're going to run into, because I saw this already when I was looking it up. Are you reading KJV?
I could pull up another one.
Or
Which one do you want me to pull up for
okay,
that verse?
NASB 95?
And I just purchased that Bible study set.
No, I mean, there's all kinds of commotion that can be made about
Just real quick. Thank you, Aaron. Appreciate you, Aaron, on YouTube with the super chat. So I just want to say thank you to Aaron real quick. But I just got the NASB 95 study set, so it comes with, I think, there's a newer version too that I got with it. But in Acts 2, for that verse, it says, verse 31, he looked ahead and spoke of the resurrection of Christ, that he was neither abandoned in Hades. Yeah, so it's saying that Christ wasn't abandoned in Hades.
No. It says he wasn't abandoned to Hades. That means he never went there.
That's not what that means. It said he was never abandoned
To Hades.
I know he wasn't abandoned to Hades.
Well, that means if you go to Hades, you are abandoned. If you go to Hades, you are abandoned.
No, because Jesus was raised from Hades.
I don't believe he ever went there. And that's what the NASB 95 is going to say right there. It said he was neither abandoned to Hades, nor did his flesh suffer decay.
And even then, the New Testament, when it speaks of Hades, it's always used as a reference to the realm that departed spirits go to. And so the same thing is used in 1 Corinthians 15, verse 54 and 55. It's speaking about passing away in the grave, and it uses interchangeable terms for passing away and Hades. And so it says neither one of those will be destroyed till Jesus comes. And so the evidence given, because it says David passed away, he went to Hades. So where are you thinking that Jesus went when he passed away?
Yeah, that's a good question. He said that to the thief on the cross that they were going to go to paradise. So I'm assuming that's the answer.
But where is that?
It's not Hades, certainly.
So why didn't it? So Acts 2:34 says David is not ascended into the heavens. So where is David?
Okay, so then let's go to Acts 2:25. David's with Jesus at that point. So he was in paradise. Call it Abraham's bosom if that's easier to understand.
Okay, but that's not heaven.
Yeah, well, see, and it's very actually unclear, right? I mean, there's some mucky water there. I'm just saying, if you look at Acts 2:25, David says of him, "I saw the Lord always in my presence,
Yeah, but
for he is at
David
my right hand."
but David spoke that before David passed away.
Yeah,
Right.
he says, "I have set the Lord continually before me, because he's at my right hand, and I will not be shaken. Therefore, my heart is glad." This is in Psalm 16. That's the cross reference to this. "Therefore, my heart is glad, and my glory rejoices. My flesh will also dwell securely, for you will not abandon my soul to Sheol, nor will you allow your Holy One to undergo decay." It's the cross reference to that, right?
Well,
To me, it for sure David did not. It was not David who who ascended into heaven. No, Christ has to first, because he's the gate. So you know what I'm
right.
saying?
Well, in verse 25, this is David speaking, but it says David wasn't speaking about himself. So David is speaking something that Christ would say, because it says in verse um, 30, therefore, being a prophet, knowing that God had sworn with an oath to him that of the fruit of his loins, according to the flesh, he would raise up Christ to sit on his throne. It said, he seeing this, therefore, before spake of the resurrection of Christ. So in verse 25, where he says, I foresaw the Lord always before my face, David is speaking this, but he's prophesying something that not he himself would say, but something Christ would say. Because it says in verse 27, thou wilt not leave my soul. So the my in verse 27 isn't David. The my is Christ. So the my in verse 26, where it says my flesh, that's not David. That's the Christ. So then when you go to the verse before where it says, he is on my right hand, that's not David. That's the Christ.
Oh, I mean, I see what you're saying, and I agree to the extent that what's being talked about here. For David says of him, "I saw the Lord always in my presence," and I am going back to Psalm 16, reading that kind of as David speaking. And the reason why is because if you look at Psalm 16:10, the word "my" is not capitalized, so I am reading that as David. However, the scripture in Acts 2 does say, "For David says of him." I just don't believe David was abandoned to Hades either. So, I mean,
Well, something I learned too, when you read the Old Testament and the New Testament quotes the Old Testament, it gives it a second application. So there's an original application, but then there's a second application. Like Psalm 69 is quoted from the New Testament in four separate locations about Jesus. But when you go to Psalm 69 and you see who it's about originally, the person was a sinner who was committing foolishness. So the New Testament can quote from the Old Testament, but it's only quoting what's being referred to. It's not bringing the whole chapter with it. It's only quoting whatever is being referenced. But so in Acts 2:34, it says David is not ascended into the heavens, and this was at least 10 days after Jesus ascended up into heaven. So Jesus ascended up into heaven. He's there for 10 days because Pentecost is 10 days later after his ascension. Why is it that 10 days after Jesus is ascended into heaven, David's still not there?
well, again, because I mean, there's no real way for me to describe exactly what I want to say other than to, again, reference Abraham's bosom, because if Jesus says that the thief on the cross is going to go to paradise, it kind of just doesn't make sense. I think you could probably see the complexity of the subject that we're talking about.
Well, I think that you and I, because the way you're describing it, it's like at first it sounds like you disagree, but then it sounds like you don't disagree. Because I agree that uh, paradise at times can be used different ways. So Second Corinthians mentions paradise as being the place where God dwells, like his throne where he is. But then the way that Jesus described it to the thief, that would be a reference to Abraham's bosom. But Abraham's bosom isn't in heaven. It pictures, if you read the story, it pictures the side of torment across the gulf close enough for you to see and hear.
Right. So there's a gap there. What did they call it? A chasm.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, but that wouldn't be heaven because if even if in that story you have the individuals waiting for resurrection, like the man in torment, he's saying, "Send Lazarus to go back to my brothers because I have five brothers. Go back to my brothers." But then you have Abraham describe it. He says, "Your brothers wouldn't believe him, even though one be risen from the realm where one passes away." I just can't say because I'm on TikTok, but the realm where one passes away. So that tells us that they're waiting for resurrection, and so individuals when they pass away, they can't go to heaven without an immortal body, a resurrected body. So that's why Jesus is pictured as the first one to receive a new eternal body meant to last forever. That's why he's pictured as the first one going to heaven. And so I believe everybody who is going to heaven will go to heaven, but 1 Corinthians 15 says that that will be at Jesus's coming.
Okay, I mean, we could basically move on. I do have another quote that I could bring up.
Oh,
I mean,
okay.
maybe pull a couple more people up here. I have another quote I could probably pull up on that specific topic, only because I've been through this topic before, and I know there is another spot. I need to find it though. Maybe it's like 115, Corinthians 15, like 32 or something like that. I can't remember it off the top of my head. I'll go look it up. But here's a question though. What do you think about Matthew 27, 27:45?
Let me pull it up.
When comparing it with, and I'll give you the next what
are you
I'm
talking
looking
about
at.
from the book of John?
No, I'm talking about this is so New Testament, Old Testament comparison.
Okay, so it's darkness from the 6th hour over the land until the 9th hour.
Yep. So now go to keep that in mind. So obviously you can remember that, right? I mean,
right.
So the 6th to the 9th hour is 12 o'clock to 3 o'clock. So we know that the sun was out, right?
Right.
And consider the word darkness. Now go to Jeremiah 33:20 and onward. And I just want to get your opinion.
So Jeremiah 23 and onward, the very last verse tells us, verse 26 tells us what this is talking about. It's talking about the return from Babylonian captivity. And so, and it's
wait. What chapter are you on?
Jeremiah 33. You said verse 20 and following. So this is Jeremiah 33, verse 26. And what's interesting, because you know how we spoke about, and I just mentioned a second ago, that when the New Testament quotes the Old Testament, it more often than not, gives it a second application.
A clarity, yeah. I agree.
Right, but it doesn't tell us, like, for example, when you remember when King Herod slew all the children in Bethlehem under two?
Sure, yep.
And it quotes the Old Testament and says there was weeping and lamenting in Ramah because Rachel wept for her children because there were no more. But when you look where that's quoted from, the original application is a reference to the Babylonians slaughtering the Jews and taking them off into captivity for 70 years. So the New Testament quotes that. And what some individuals have the mindset of is, oh, that original verse must have therefore been about Jesus's lifetime, but it wasn't, because the original application had to do with the Babylonians slaughtering those in Bethlehem, or not in Bethlehem, those of Rachel's descendants, because then immediately after it says, don't weep anymore because your children will return to the land. So it's a reference to the return from Babylonian captivity. So the reason I bring that up is because sometimes you get pictures of the return from Babylonian captivity, and there's a picture of an establishment of a covenant. So individuals will say, oh, that's the new covenant, but there's indication to believe that the original application would just simply mean that God would once again be in fellowship with his people. And so the fact that it mentions the Levites tells us that this covenant, in its original context, wasn't a reference to the new covenant, which would be after the order of Melchizedek.
Okay.
So, but I believe verse 20. Oh, go ahead.
I'm reading that a bit differently and making connections, but keep going. I'll find the exact.
Well, because verse
Basically, I think
21, it says, "Then may also my covenant be broken with David my servant, that he should not have a son to sit reigning upon his throne," which that's true because Jesus is ruling on the throne right now and he's a descendant of David. But then it says this, "And with the Levites my priests, or the priests my ministers." And so once Jesus ascended into heaven and the covenants changed, that changed, right? Just because one was a Levite and a priest didn't make them ministers, because it tells us that we're ministers of the new covenant, ministers of the New Testament. So they were no longer ministers once the covenant changed. And then it says, in verse 22, "So will I multiply the seed of David my servant and the Levites that minister unto me." So if the Levites are ministering, that would mean that they're doing animal sacrifices. So my belief is that this is just as it says in verse 26. It says, "I will cause their captivity to return, and I will have mercy on them." So it's a picture that they're going to go into captivity, but they're not going to be left and abandoned in captivity. They're going to come back from captivity, and their Old Testament blessings are going to continue. So I
okay.
would
So
say,
okay,
okay,
you're drawing. Okay, so there's two spots. I want to come back to what you just said because I think that it's specific that there are two kings right there, Herod and his son, right?
wait,
And both
where?
of them die. Matthew 2, that's where it talks about Herod passing away and his son, Herod's son passing away.
Uh-huh.
So I have a verse on that to go back to in the Old Testament. However, Jeremiah 33:26, which you were just referring to, it goes deeper than what you were just saying. Like it's saying it. I mean, so first let's connect what I was talking about. Let's try to connect. So I was talking about Matthew 27:45, which was talking about darkness, right? And then if you go to Jeremiah 33:20, "Thus says the Lord, if you can break my covenant for the day and my covenant for the night, so that day and night will not be at their appointed time." And it goes on. Now, the question becomes, do you believe that the appointment of day and night, because darkness fell, that timing was disrupted? And if you read Jeremiah 33 a little bit further, it continues on to basically say, okay, well, if my covenant for day and night stand not, and the fixed patterns of heaven and earth I have not established, then I would reject the descendants of Jacob and David, my servant, not taking from his descendants rulers over the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but I will restore their fortunes and have mercy on them. So in other words, Israel is saved, but something else happens in there. And I think it has to do basically, and the fixed patterns of, if you, let's start there first though. Matthew 27:45, do you see that being a problem in that it's possible that day and night were not at their appointed time because darkness fell upon what I read as the entire earth, but it says darkness fell upon the land. So I don't want to add anything to it. It doesn't seem to be an eclipse. That wouldn't make sense because those have happened before. Well, you know what I mean? I've probably been around forever. So.
I know before Matthew 27, because even after Jeremiah, because after Jeremiah was the return from Babylonian captivity, and in Isaiah 13, it pictures the fall of Babylon. And it says concerning in Isaiah 13:10, this is about the fall of Babylon, which occurred before Matthew 27, right? Because the Jews were released from Babylonian captivity at the fall of Babylon, and then Medo-Persia conquered Babylon, and then Greece conquered Medo-Persia, then Rome conquered Greece. And so they're living, the first century is far beyond the fall of Babylon. But at the fall of Babylon, in Isaiah 13:10, it says this, "The sun shall be darkened in his going forth, and the moon shall not cause her light to shine." So there is, I think what you're referencing also is this language showing a breaking in the covenant of the sun and the moon, but this is a reference to the fall of Babylon. It's just language indicating national judgment, which is used in many locations. So just the whole point I'm trying to bring up is that the event you're referencing of night and day is far beyond this immediate fulfillment of what we see in Isaiah 13:10. But I think that Jeremiah 33.
There's another reference to this event, and it I thought it was like Hosea, but it's one of the shorter books, and it does say the exact time when the event was going to occur. So it says at 12 noon or whatever the timing is, exactly, it's to the T. It might be in Amos.
But
I think it's in Amos.
But it says here that
here it is right here.
But it says
here it is right here.
33.
Amos.
Okay, go ahead.
Amos 8:9. It says, "It will come about in that day, declares the Lord, that I will make the sun go down at noon and make the earth dark in broad daylight." So it's exact timing, and it says the sun goes down. So the timing on that is saying there's an interruption in the covenant for day and night as it originally stood. If you're following me, I don't know if you on the same page think the same way, but I'm saying, like, if
but this
in
says
Jeremiah,
here in Amos chapter 8, it's not a reference to what we see, because it says here, I will cause the sun to go down at noon, I will darken the earth and clear day. So it's like an indication God's grabbing their attention. Then it says, I will turn your feasts in the morning, your songs into lamentation. But then if you read the next verse, it says, behold, the days come, says the Lord. I will send a famine in the land, not a famine of bread nor a thirst for water, but of hearing the words of the Lord. And so right after the darkening that happened in Matthew 27, there was no famine of hearing the words of the Lord. It was actually like an explosion of hearing the words of the Lord. Right.
Yeah, but that's behold, days are coming. So it's it could still be yet to come that is even, you can't sit here and say that that's happened yet, because you can also point back to, gosh, I think it's in Isaiah where it basically says people will be wandering around and they will look up and they will basically forsake their God and their King. I forget which. It's like Isaiah 8, maybe 21.
Amos
I don't know.
14 tells us what we were reading about in that chapter, because it talks about the sun and the moon, right? It talks about them having a famine of the word. But verse 14 tells us what all that's about. And it says, they that swear by the sin of Samaria and say, thy God, O Dan, liveth, and the manner of Beersheba liveth, even they shall fall and never rise again. So it's talking about punishment of the northern kingdom of Israel. And I believe Assyria was the one who came in, and that was before the Babylonian captivity.
So you do not think that Amos 8:9 has anything to do with Mark 27:45?
Other than language that sounds similar? No.
Okay. That's interesting. All right. Well, I mean, that's basically what was coming to my mind. I mean, because if you look at 20 and Jeremiah 33:20, and then if you could break my covenant by day, then my covenant may also be broken with David, my servant, so that he not have a son to reign on his throne, and with the Levitical priests. And it's interesting because Christ also says, the Lord says to sit by, what is it? Psalm 110, right?
Mm-hmm.
The Lord says to my Lord, and Jesus basically says, how is that David's son?
Yep.
So, I mean, that kind of plays into it too. But it's interesting because it says in verse 24, have you not observed what this people have spoken, saying, the two families which the Lord chose, he has rejected them. They despise my people, no longer are they as a nation in their sight. So I believe that's talking about the northern and southern kingdom, like the two families which the Lord chose. People are basically trying to curse Israel. Now, a real believer wouldn't do that, I don't think. So there's still work to be done on that side.
Well, even obviously, in Jeremiah 33, the reference you're bringing about the breaking of the covenant in day and night, in Matthew 27, if you could even call that a breaking of the covenant of day and night, but it's, if you contributed it to that, in Jeremiah 33 verse 20, the factor under consideration would be is if the people could break the covenant of day and night. He says, if you can break the covenant, but nobody can control heaven above us, the shining forth of the sun and And so Matthew 27 was an event accomplished by the Father. And so that wouldn't have been the people breaking the covenant of night and day.
Well, it's the Son. So I'm looking at it as there was some kind of
But it would have been something
repercussion.
that the people did. It says, if you can break my covenant of the day and my covenant of the night. So this isn't something God is doing. This is something that they are doing.
They are doing. But well, okay, so I'm thinking about the parable of the vineyard where the son comes and he goes, okay, let's take him out because that's the person in line to get the inheritance. If we take him out, then it's all ours. So they do break a covenant. They knew who it was.
Well, but that's not the covenant with the sun and the moon. I think the purpose of Jeremiah 33, verse 20 and 21 together combined, when you look at them, is because God is saying, like, if you can break my covenant with day and night, right? He says, if you can do that, then my other covenant, because this is a reference to God's covenant keeping, like the firmness of God's covenant, like God saying my covenant with day and night is so strong that no one can break it. But if someone can break my covenant with day and night, then that shows that my covenant could be broken concerning David being king and the Levites being the priests. But the fact that no one can break God's covenant with day and night was to show them that it was impossible for the covenant that God made concerning David and the Levites to be broken. So, and that's how the chapter ends in verse 26. He says, I will cause their captivity to return and have mercy on them. So I believe this specifically has to do like a even if, thing.
Well, that's the thing, is because it's almost like doubling up. Verse 20 says one thing.
Revelation, but also the Olivet Discourse. So I would love to send you a copy of it in order for you to get my understanding on that passage in Matthew 24.
No, I mean, that's cool. I appreciate your offer. That's really awesome of you. But you can send that to somebody else. I mean, I appreciate it though. I really do.
Well,
I
I
mean,
have
if
a
I was going to do
PDF I
something,
can
I'd
send
probably
you.
find a copy, bro.
No,
I would probably be fine.
Well, I have a PDF that I can send you, and the reason why is because you stated that you believe Jesus, that Jesus wasn't lying, and I don't believe that he was lying either. But in Matthew chapter 24, the promise of the stars falling from heaven, that's just like Isaiah 13 about the punishment of Babylon. And so when Jesus referenced the stars falling from heaven, that wasn't literal. That would have just been a poetic language, just like in the Old Testament for the fall of a nation. And so when Jesus mentioned the stars falling from heaven, he said in verse 33, Matthew 24:34, he says, I say to you, this generation shall not pass till all these things be fulfilled. So however we understand Jesus to talk about the stars falling from heaven, we have to understand it to mean something that was accomplished during that generation.
I disagree, because again, that's talking about the end times, and there are several different.
So you disagree with Jesus?
Things that are mentioned. No, I don't disagree with Jesus, but I agree. I think that those are speaking about the end times, and for sure, if I rolled back into that area, it's basically talking about there's going to be tons of people who are false prophets running around.
But it said that was. Have you ever done a word search on the term in the Bible where it says this generation? Every single time that the Bible references this generation, it's always a reference to those who are living at that time that statement is made.
Well, I mean, I could, well, just, it's almost like this. If your interpretation is to say that the language used when it's talking about stars falling and the heavens being shaken is somewhat a figurative language, then I could say the same thing about the word generation being used.
No, no, because
figure.
generation would be literal, and that's a time statement. So Jesus is making a time statement. So the time statement isn't poetic or figurative, and every time that you use this generation in the Bible, it's always a reference to the then living generation. But have you ever looked in the Old Testament and seen all the different places it mentions judgments of nations and mentions, the stars falling from heaven and the moon becoming blood and the sun not shining? Have you ever read all the different nations that were punished?
I'm sure I haven't read all of those things, but I mean, I have read enough to basically defend myself against people who are Hebrew Israelites who claim that the nations or Gentiles will never be saved. And that's certainly not true, because in the Song of Moses, which is Deuteronomy 32:43, it says, "Rejoice, O nations, with his people." So it's obvious that there are other people besides Israelites that are going to be saved, which is why I interpret not all who are Israel are actually Israel, because it's like some people get grafted in. Don't boast above the branches, and think you're hot stuff.
Well, hey, you can easily on my website, the Oroville530.com, it should say my email, but if you could email Oroville530@icloud.com, and that way either we could correspond through email, or if you see me live again, you're more than welcome to come up, and if you have something else or the same discussion that you want to have, you're more than welcome to come back.
No, okay, so I got one more then, and then it's a quick one. So if we flip one page here, see what you think of this. Jeremiah 31:22. Now I'm gonna sit here and I'm thinking that's a reference to Mary's lineage, as we all know. I mean, back in the Old Testament.
So it says, "How long wilt thou go back about, O thou backsliding daughter? For the Lord hath created a new thing in the earth; a woman shall compass a man."
Mm-hmm.
Well, the verse before tells us, it says, "Turn again, O virgin of Israel." So when it talks about the daughter, that would be a reference to the people of Israel. But then when it says a woman shall compass a man, let's see. It says, what's the surrounding context? It says, "As yet they shall use this speech in the land of Judah, when I shall bring again their captivity." So it appears that this is a reference to a return from captivity, because it says, "There shall dwell in Judah itself all the cities thereof husbandmen, they shall go forth with flocks." Yeah, so this is a reference to them returning from Babylonian captivity. So it says, "How long will you go about, O thou backsliding daughter?" So that's a reference to like God telling them he's going to bring them back from captivity. So why are they going to be in a state of disobedience if God only has good in store for them? And then it says, "For the Lord hath created a new thing in the earth, a woman shall compass a man." So I don't know specifically, I'd have to do some more research on what exactly that means, but the context of this chapter has to do with the restoration from Babylonian captivity. That's why verse 17 says the same thing. "There is hope in thine end, saith the Lord, that thy children shall come again to their own border."
I agree. I mean, obviously, there's going to be a day when it should be okay for them to.
Oh, but I believe that this was fulfilled already. So I don't believe that this is about our future.
Oh, okay. Interesting. Because again, there are only a couple lines later, it's talking about the new covenant, which they still don't even believe in the things that are listed here.
But I believe that the New Testament can quote the Old Testament and give it a second application. So I believe that even the original could have had in mind just the idea that God would be faithful once again to his people. Because even when you see that language about God writing his law in their inward parts, that language is used about what would be accomplished when they returned from Babylonian captivity. So it doesn't surprise me that there would be an immediate application, but then God, through that immediate application, would also draw forth a second application.
I'm not sure I totally follow you there. I mean, I think that there's not really too much difference between what the New Testament and the Old Testament says. For example, I believe it's I require loyalty, not sacrifice. And when you look at the New Testament interpolation of that, is basically I require compassion, not sacrifice. So loyalty versus compassion, and there's a clarity that's made. So I don't think it's a second application. It's just a clarity. I think they connect directly, like fairly easily. But I just found that verse pretty interesting because the paternal side has mainly been listed, right? A son of Shem, son of this, son of that, always referring to males. There's only a few females where it even lists people in the genealogies. So I find it interesting because it says a woman will encompass a man. And I'm thinking that definitely, and it's only a couple of verses later where it does talk about the new covenant. So I'm thinking that's talking about Mary. And they have two genealogies, one in Matthew and the other in Luke. And one says, basically the Matthew one looks like Joseph's, and the Luke 3 one looks like Mary's. And it also says in it, it's saying supposed father of Joseph. Well, we know his God's father, so father's God. So, you know what I mean? I find it interesting. It's just something to contemplate, you know what I mean?
All right, and in your community, have you heard of a religious group of baptized believers referred to as the Church of Christ?
The Church of Christ? Not really. I'm not like a big denomination guy.
Right, me neither. Yeah, Romans 16:16 says the churches of Christ salute you, which tells us that's a acceptable description of God's people. And then the very next verse says to avoid those who cause division. So if we were in the first century and we gathered together with baptized believers, that gathering would be called the Church of Christ, and then that gathering would be told to avoid those who cause division. So I'm not into divisions or denominations either. But if you go to a website, it's called bible.ca, and then you click find a church near you, you can find the Church of Christ in your community where it's just baptized believers who gather together.
I mean, to be honest, I'm Catholic, and I have to stay that way. I think that if you look at like Revelation 2, all that kind of stuff, you know, I don't know what's exactly all that stuff means, but if there are 7 churches, and elsewhere it does say like, you know, pretty much like stick with what you learned when you were a kid.
Well, if I'm not mistaken, even the Catholic website shows that they believe the beast has already been revealed.
I don't know. I have no idea.
Yeah, so, and I would agree with that, but yeah, I'm not a Catholic. I'm just a Christian. So, but
yeah, I'm a Christian too. Like I said, I don't believe in denominational stuff. That's not for me to figure out.
Well, I'd encourage you to investigate the local Church of Christ in your community, and if you want to come back and have another conversation, I'm more than willing to do so.
Right on, man. I appreciate your time. Thank you.
No problem. Appreciated you coming on as a guest. You were very respectful, and it was good to have back and forth dialogue with you.
Hey, right on, man. Take care.
All right, bye.